Reports from the frontline of Russia's bloody battle for the Ukrainian city of Soledar suggests Vladimir Putin is becoming increasingly desperate and is losing this war. Russia's group of ruthless mercenaries, the Wagner Group, are claiming to have killed 500 Ukrainian soldiers and to have liberated the city. But commentators on the conflict say Putin's reliance on mercenaries run by oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner and a close ally of the president, is a sign of weakness. The statement comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky mocked previous assertions by Wagner that Soledar had fallen. The claims were also disputed by soldiers fighting for Ukraine. News agency Reuters, which has journalists and photographers on the ground, has so far been unable to verify the situation. ABC Global Affairs editor John Lyons described the battle for Soledar as horribly brutal, saying it is reminiscent of the World War I battle with trenches and mud. Speaking to ABC Radio, he said that while it's not clear if Russia has taken over the city, what is clear is that Ukraine is in trouble. He also pointed out that Russia's use of the Wagner Group over their own army is a sign of weakness. A U.S. Marine fighting for Ukraine told ABC Radio on Thursday morning Soledar has not fallen, and Wagner fighters were nothing but a bunch of clowns. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, left, and Chief of the Russian General Staff Valery Gerasimov attend the meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin during his visit to the Joint Staff of Troops involved in Russia's military operation in Ukraine, at an unknown location, Saturday, December 17, 2022. The Chief of the Military's General Staff, General Valery Gerasimov, was named the new chief of the Russian forces in Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Wednesday appointed Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov as overall commander for what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine, now in its 11th month. Surovikin was appointed only in October to lead the invasion and oversaw heavy attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Surovikin was ordered to head the campaign after Ukrainian offensives turned the tide of the war and drew attention to poor training, equipment and morale among Russian forces. Russia appears to be laying the groundwork to summon hundreds of thousands more men across the country to take part in the war against Ukraine. Lawmaker Andrei Kartopolov, the head of the State Duma's Defense Committee, lamented in an interview with RBK on Wednesday that the country doesn't have enough mobilized reserve forces for a large-scale war. The message behind Kartopolov's latest remarks seemed clear even to pro-Kremlin figures. Reserve forces are automatically sent to fight when the Russian president declares a mobilization. The Defense Ministry does not disclose the number of its reservists. Fears of a new call-up are so widespread that scammers are now sending out bogus lists of people who will be mobilized as part of a phishing scheme to steal personal data, one Telegram channel specializing in mobilization said Wednesday. Vladimir Putin has authorized another shakeup in the military leadership leading the invasion of Ukraine, after admitting that the situation was difficult in the regions Russia claims to have annexed. Meanwhile, Kyiv mocked claims that it had lost Soledar, an eastern Ukrainian town at the center of a furious Russian assault. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced that Valery Gerasimov, Chief of the General Staff, had been appointed as overall commander of forces in Ukraine, one of a number of changes in recent months as Mr. Putin seeks a success story to sell at home. It is clear that pressure is building on the Kremlin, with the move in effect demoting General Sergei Surovikin, who had been named Russia's top battlefield commander in Ukraine only last October. The battle for Soledar, seen as a stepping stone in the wider goal of conquering the Donbass region, continues to rage as Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia was trying to pretend it had claimed victory in the town. As fierce fighting in the Ukraine war continues, Russia has claimed what it believes to be a significant symbolic and strategic victory by announcing the capture of Soledar in Donetsk. Combatants from the notorious Wagner Group of mercenaries, led by Vladimir Putin ally Yevgeny Prigozhin, declared late on Tuesday that they had taken control of the eastern mining town in the Donetsk region, home to what is said to be Europe's largest salt mine and, prior to the war, a population of around 10,000 people. Ukrainian forces staged military exercises near the Belarusian border amid fears that Russia will launch another offensive from its allies' territory, as it did at the start of the invasion in February. President Volodymyr Zelensky downplayed warnings of Russian preparations in Belarus but said, "Nevertheless, we must be ready both at the border and in the regions." Poland has decided to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine as part of an international coalition, the Polish president said today as Warsaw seeks to play a leading role in reaching a consensus among Western allies on such support. Kyiv has been requesting heavy military vehicles such as the German-made Leopard 2, which would represent a significant step up in Western support to Ukraine. Mr. Duda said that he hoped that the Polish tanks, together with tanks from other countries, would soon travel to Ukraine. A huge fire raged at a fireworks factory in Kharkiv, northeastern Ukraine, after it was hit by a Russian strike late on Tuesday, January 10, according to local authorities. Footage shows fireworks exploding in the sky after the attack. Specialists of the State Emergency Service are working on site, said Ola Synhubov, head of Kharkiv's military administration. No casualties have been reported. The attack comes after 2 people were killed and 5 others, including a 13-year-old girl, were wounded by a rocket strike on Monday, January 9 in Kharkiv. 80% of people seeking protection in Germany last year from Ukraine. Roughly 8 out of 10 people seeking protection in Germany last year came from Ukraine as part of the largest flight of people in Europe since World War II, the Interior Ministry said on Wednesday. After Russia's invasion in mid-February, 1,045,185 people who fled Ukraine were registered in Germany, it said, adding that most of them were women and children. In addition to the Ukrainian refugees, who do not need to go through an asylum procedure, over 244,000 people filed an asylum application last year, 27.9% more than the year before. The majority of asylum applications came from people from Syria, followed by nationals of Afghanistan, Turkey and Iraq. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Wednesday appointed Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov as commander of the Combined Forces Group for Moscow's special military operation in Ukraine. Announcing the appointment, the Defense Ministry said the changes were designed to increase the effectiveness of managing military operations in Ukraine, more than 10 months into the campaign. Russian President Vladimir Putin discussed energy and transport projects with Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi in a telephone call on Wednesday, the Kremlin said. Moscow and Tehran have moved to forge closer relations following Russia's invasion of Ukraine last February, and the two are among the world's largest oil exporters. In a readout of the call, the Kremlin said the two leaders had discussed how to further develop mutually beneficial projects in the energy, transport and logistics sectors, and also stated their desire to normalize the situation in Syria. Ukraine and Russia agree new prisoner swap in talks, Russian official. Russia and Ukraine have agreed on an exchange of 40 prisoners of war each, Russian Human Rights Commissioner Tatyana Moskalkova said on Wednesday after meeting her Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Lubinets in Turkey. Russia and Ukraine have conducted numerous prisoner swaps, most recently on Sunday, amounting to hundreds of captives each in the course of the war, which is now in its 11th month. In a separate press appearance, Lubinets said the swap agreed on Wednesday was part of a broader arrangement by which both sides regularly exchange prisoners, but underscored that they had not signed any official agreements. Lubinets added that the Ukrainian side had voiced, among other issues, its concerns over alleged Russian violations of the Geneva Convention in its treatment of Ukrainian POWs. Given the current difficulty of establishing humanitarian corridors inside Ukraine, Moskalkova said the ombudsman should help specific people to move between regions and countries, saying Turkey could play an important role. Separately, Russia's state-owned RIA news agency quoted Moskalkova as saying, important words about the need for a ceasefire in Ukraine had been spoken during her meeting with her Ukrainian and Turkish colleagues. Moskalkova said a ceasefire was necessary to stop human rights violations, RIA reported. She also asked Turkey, a NATO ally, to stop supplying arms to Ukraine. As Moskalkova and Lubinets met in Ankara, a fierce battle was raging for the small town of Soledar in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine's deputy defense minister said on Wednesday that Russian forces were trying without success to break through Ukrainian defensive lines to fully capture the eastern town of Soledar and that fierce fighting was raging. U.S. Army vehicles tanks are brought ashore in the Netherlands as a military unit is transported to Poland and Lithuania. The move is part of a NATO mission to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in Vlissingen, Netherlands. NATO and the EU are launching a task force to boost protection of critical infrastructure in response to last year's attack on the Nord Stream gas pipelines and Russia's weaponizing of energy, the organization's leaders said on Wednesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday that the situation in the areas of Ukraine that Russia says it has annexed was difficult in places. However, Putin, speaking at a televised meeting with officials, said Russia had all the resources it needed to improve life in the 4 Ukrainian regions that Moscow unilaterally claimed to have annexed in September. Estonia has told Russia to reduce the number of diplomats at its embassy in Tallinn by February, the Baltic country's foreign ministry said on Wednesday. It said in a statement Russia should lower the number of diplomats to 8, which equals the number of Estonian diplomats in Moscow. Russia's defense ministry said on Wednesday that Russian airborne units had surrounded the Ukrainian town of Soledar from the north and south, while Russia's air force struck Ukrainian positions in the town, Russian agencies reported. Ukraine's military denied on Wednesday that Russian forces had taken control of the eastern town of Soledar, and said the intensity of battles in the area could be compared to fighting in World War II. Serhiy Cherevatiy, spokesperson for the Eastern Military Command, told Ukrainian television the battle for Soledar was important and that Ukrainian forces had not allowed Russian forces to break through front lines. Reuters was unable to independently verify the situation on the ground in Soledar. Seizing Soledar would be Russia's most substantial gain since August, after a series of humiliating retreats throughout much of the second half of 2022. Russian forces have been fighting for months to capture Bakhmut. But any victory would come at a massive cost, with troops from both sides having taken heavy losses in some of the most intense combat since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 11 months ago. The Kyiv government has released pictures in recent days showing what it says are scores of Russian soldiers strewn dead in muddy fields. Moscow says capturing Bakhmut would be a major step toward taking full control of the Donetsk region, one of 4 provinces it claimed to have annexed 3 months ago. Near Bakhmut, a team of Ukrainian soldiers fired volleys of shells from a heavy anti-aircraft gun at what they said were Russian ground positions, across a barren snowy field. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky repeated his call for more Western weapons on Tuesday evening, saying Russia was gathering its forces to intensify its campaign. Ukraine said earlier its forces were still holding on to positions in Soledar, withstanding assaults by wave after wave of Russian forces seeking their first battlefield victory for months. The battle for Soledar raged in sub-zero temperatures on Wednesday, with Russia's mercenary Wagner group claiming to have taken control of the salt mining town in eastern Ukraine, as its fighters poured fire on a pocket of resistance in the center. Kyiv said earlier its forces were holding out. The Ukrainian military's morning summary made one mention of Soledar, listing the town as one of several being shelled in the Donetsk region. Reuters was unable to verify conditions on the ground. Russian commanders have made the capture of Soledar a key objective in a campaign to take the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut and Ukraine's larger eastern Donbass region. Russia's capture of Soledar and its huge salt mines would have symbolic, military, and commercial value for Russia. But the situation in and around Soledar appeared fluid. The British Defense Ministry has said that the new deployment of Russian aircraft to Belarus appears likely a genuine exercise, rather than a preparation for any additional offensive operations against Ukraine. Russia and Belarus are training their forces in a tactical flight exercise slated to be held from January 16 to February 1, the Belarusian Defense Ministry announced. Russia's claim of capturing Donetsk Oblast's Soledar region is likely false and Wagner Group forces are still fighting against concerted Ukrainian resistance, said the US-based think tank the Institute for the Study of War. Analysts say a Russian occupation of Soledar will not amount to a momentous strategic gain in the war, but Russian officials are believed to be eyeing the huge salt mines in the region for their commercial value. The Russian government has run into its second-highest budget deficit in the post-Soviet era after invading Ukraine for what it calls a special military operation. The budget gap has struck 3.3 trillion rubles last year, accounting for 2.3% of the Russian economy, reported the New York Times, citing the country's finance minister Anton Siluanov's remarks during a government meeting on Tuesday. While the Russian government has not published a detailed breakdown of its expenditures in 2022, it is widely assumed that a majority chunk of its spending has gone into fueling the military as it launched a war on Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pressing for months for NATO to provide his forces with U.S. Abrams and German-built Leopard 2 battle tanks. One Western official said that a reported Ukrainian call for 300 tanks was not an unreasonable number to create sufficient force mass for them to go on the offensive. Mr. Zelensky repeated his call for more Western weapons, stating that Russia was gathering its forces to intensify its campaign. Previously, Ukraine has said that its soldiers are still holding on to positions in Soledar, withstanding assaults by wave after wave of Russian forces seeking their first battlefield victory in months. Ukraine will not be able to take back significant territory from Russia without an increase in fighting power, including tanks and other heavy armor, officials in the West have warned. Russia's forces have amped up their military offensive in a fresh comeback in the war in recent months as they rain shells and missiles around the besieged eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. In a territorial gain, Russia has likely captured the nearby town of Soledar, according to Ukrainian and UK officials, but are likely to be suffering significant losses in the process. Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that Russia is gathering for another escalation as he sought more modern weapons in the continuing war. More than 600 Russian agents and spies alike have been exposed by Ukraine since the beginning of the war, the country's security service has reported. In an update released on its Telegram channel, the Security Service of Ukraine stated that more than 340 perpetrators had been sent to court. Culprits had been conducting intelligence and subversive activities against Ukraine, it reported, furthering that some enemy agents had been preparing for the physical liquidation of the Minister of Defense and head of the main Directorate of Intelligence. A former head of the Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv was similarly exposed for voluntarily offering his help to the enemy by passing on information about military prisoners of the Russian Federation to the Russian Special Services. In Russia, two signs emerged Tuesday that officials were grappling with the military shortcomings revealed during the conflict in Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, whose performance has been fiercely criticized in some Russian circles but who has retained Russian President Vladimir Putin's confidence, said Tuesday that his military would use its experience in Ukraine to improve combat training. Military communications and control systems will be improved using artificial intelligence, Shoigu said, and troops will be given better tactical gear and equipment. The second indication of trouble involves Russia's production of weapons and other supplies its military needs for the fight in Ukraine. The deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, warned that officials who failed to meet deadlines for such items could face criminal charges. Putin appointed Medvedev last month to head a new commission tasked with trying to solve the military supply problems. Numerous reports have suggested Russia is running low on certain weapons and was sending some troops into battle with insufficient equipment and clothing. Part of the Kremlin's challenge is keeping up with the weapons and supplies that Western allies have provided to Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Tuesday that NATO members have become a party to the conflict, pumping weapons, technology, and intelligence data into Ukraine. Several frontline cities in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk provinces have witnessed intense fighting in recent months. Together, the provinces make up the Donbass, a broad industrial region bordering Russia that Putin identified as a focus from the war's outset and where Moscow-backed separatists have fought since 2014. Russia's grinding eastern offensive captured almost all of Luhansk during the summer. Donetsk escaped the same fate, and the Russian military subsequently poured manpower and resources around Bakhmut. Kirilenko, the Donetsk region's governor, estimated more than 2 months ago that 90% of Bakhmut's pre-war population of over 70,000 had fled since Moscow focused on seizing the entire Donbass. Ukraine's presidential office said at least 4 civilians were killed and another 30 wounded in Russian shelling between Monday and Tuesday. Vitaly Kim, the governor of the southern Mykolaiv region, said Russian forces shelled the port of Ochakiv and the area around it late Monday and again early Tuesday. He said 15 people, including a 2-year-old child, were wounded in Monday's shelling. Russian forces are escalating their onslaught against Ukrainian positions around the wrecked city of Bakhmut, Ukrainian officials said, bringing new levels of death and devastation in the grinding, months-long battle for control of eastern Ukraine that is part of Moscow's wider war. Ukrainian forces are facing waves of assaults by Russian forces on the small salt mining town of Soledar, Kiev officials said on Tuesday, as Moscow strives to make its first breakthrough in the east in months. Britain's defense ministry said Russian troops and mercenaries of the Wagner Group were probably now in control of most of the town after advances in the last 4 days. Seizing Soledar would give an advantage to Russian forces as they fight to capture the city of Bakhmut, a few miles, to the southwest. Troops from both sides have been taking heavy losses there in some of the most intense trench warfare since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 11 months ago. Bakhmut is located on a strategic supply line between the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which make up the Donbass, Ukraine's industrial heartland. Gaining control of Bakhmut could give Russia a platform to advance on 2 bigger cities, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. It comes as Russian forces are escalating their onslaught against Ukrainian positions around the wrecked eastern city of Bakhmut, Ukrainian officials said, bringing new levels of death and devastation in the months-long conflict. The small salt mining town of Soledar is almost completely destroyed, but the fighting continues, and the eastern front line is holding, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on January 11. In his evening address, Zelensky claimed that Russia was lying about its victory over the town in Donetsk Oblast, hoping that presenting some results would increase the public's support for mobilization. Donetsk Oblast Governor Pavlo Kirilenko, also denying that Russia captured Soledar, said that more than 80% of Soledar is completely destroyed. He said Russia utilizes its siege tactics to capture the town, trapping some 550 residents in dire conditions. Russian militants in eastern Ukraine and Kremlin-run mercenary Wagner Group said late on January 10 that Russia had captured Soledar. Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of Wagner Group and close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, has released photos and videos of what he said were his mercenaries in the salt mines of Soledar. In the past months, Russia has faced a string of humiliating battlefield defeats across the front line. Capturing Soledar would be Moscow's biggest achievement since July. It is also crucial for Russia's long-sought goal of encircling Bakhmut. However, the capture of Soledar does not guarantee Russia's success in Bakhmut, military experts said, since crucial roads west of the city are predominantly controlled by Ukrainian forces. Russia's defense ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said during the day that Russian forces blocked Soledar from the north and south with airborne units, who are striking Ukrainian strongholds in the town. Konashenkov claimed that Russia captured the village of Pitharadin, southwest of Soledar, but added that fighting is still raging in the contested town. Fierce fighting continues as Russia concentrates its main efforts to completely capture partially occupied Donetsk Oblast, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces said in its evening briefing. The General Staff claimed that Russian forces had not yet captured Soledar, and were suffering heavy losses. The report also said that Russian forces were trying to disrupt the Ukrainian supply routes in the area.